Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are doing a very necessary and frankly heartbreaking look at the Kwong court fire in Hong Kong. This happened in November of 2025, and it wasn't just another bad fire. We're talking 156 people confirmed dead, with more missing. It's the deadliest fire the city has seen in almost 80 years. So our mission for this deep dive is to go beyond those headline numbers. We're going to unpack the toxic synergy of construction failure, alleged corruption, and predictable fire physics that turned a routine maintenance project into a mass fatality event.
And what's so striking here and so tragic is that the mechanism of this disaster is not new. It's not a surprise.
Right.
It follows what engineers call a systemic killing formula that we've seen in other high-rise tragedies around the world. So we really need to look at the building, the materials they used, and how the entire system failed.
Okay, let's start with the anatomy of the catastrophe itself, the scale. The fire started around 3:00 p.m. on November 26.
And it escalated incredibly quickly. It went from a 3-alarm to a 5-alarm blaze, which is the most severe classification you can have.
And just to give you a sense of that scale, Kwong Fook Court has 8 high-rise blocks. And the fire's peak, 7 of them were fully engulfed.
7 out of 8. You have to understand the kind of building we're talking about here. This is an aging public housing estate.
Built in 1983, so it's over 40 years old.
Exactly. High density, towers over 30 stories high, and crucially, they are packed in really tight.
Oh, tight.
The spacing between the blocks is less than 10 meters. That proximity is terrifying when you wrap these buildings in something flammable.
And let's talk about the people inside, because the human vulnerability here is just, it's heartbreaking.
It is. Nearly 40% of the residents were elderly, many with mobility issues.
So the very people who can't evacuate quickly. But something else made it a death trap, didn't it?
Yes, the ongoing construction. Residents reported that their windows had been sealed shut or obstructed by the renovation works.
So they couldn't see what was happening, and they couldn't get out or even vent the smoke.
They were trapped, essentially sealed inside their own apartments while a fire raged outside.
Okay, and the immediate aftermath. The government response was huge, right?
It had to be. They opened 9 shelters, secured over 1,000 temporary housing units in hotels and hostels, and the financial relief was announced pretty quickly.
What was that?
HK $200,000 in condolence payments for each death, and a HK $50,000 living allowance for each family affected.
All right, now we have to get into the science of this because this is the really shocking part. How does a fire on the outside of a concrete building spread so fast and bypass all the built-in fire protection?
It comes down to the refurbishment materials. They created what engineers are now calling a vertical fire ladder.
A fire ladder.
Exactly. It wasn't one single material. It was a combination of 3 accelerants that basically formed a continuous combustible wick that ran right up the face of these towers.
Okay, what were those 3 things?
First, you have the traditional bamboo scaffolding, flammable.
Right.
Second, the plastic debris netting, those green nets you see on every construction site.
Also flammable.
And third, foamed insulation boards. They were being used to seal gaps around the windows. Highly, highly combustible.
So you're telling me these 3 sort of everyday construction materials created a giant matchstick wrapped around the building?
That's a perfect way to put it. It created this continuous combustible surface.
Yeah.
Once it caught fire, the flames were just driven straight up by buoyancy and wind. The whole exterior became a chimney.
And then it jumped from building to building.
Yeah, that's the 10-meter spacing problem. In the dry, windy conditions, burning debris was just blown across that narrow gap, and the fire leaped from one tower to the next.
It's terrifying, and this is where it just gets infuriating. Because this wasn't just an accident. Corruption played a direct role here.
A direct technical role. The investigation found contractors had deliberately bought and used substandard non-fire retardant netting.
This wasn't a mistake.
No. Investigators from the ICC, that's Hong Kong's anti-corruption agency, they found samples of good netting mixed with the bad stuff.
And they hid it.
They hid it. They put the non-compliant nets in hard-to-reach places, specifically to dodge inspections. It was a calculated deception.
Hold on. So this fire, the deadliest in 80 years, it happened because a contractor wanted to save. What did the chief secretary call it? A little bit of money.
That is the brutal math of this tragedy.
Yeah.
A tiny cost saving for over 150 lives.
Unbelievable.
And when we talk about why it was so deadly, we have to be clear. The primary killer wasn't the heat. It was the smoke.
Right.
When you burn foamed polymers, plastics, PVC, you get enormous quantities of thick, black, toxic smoke.
And what specific gases are we talking about?
We're talking primarily about carbon monoxide, COO, but also hydrogen cyanide, HCN. In a field apartment, With the windows blocked, lethal concentrations would have been reached in minutes. It would have overwhelmed people very, very quickly.
So we know how it spread, but why was this stuff allowed on the building in the first place? Let's shift to the system that enabled this, the regulatory failure.
Well, the whole maintenance project was already deeply controversial. The costs had skyrocketed from an estimated 140 million Hong Kong dollars to 330 million.
And there were allegations of collusion.
Serious allegations of bid rigging, what's known locally as Wei. It's where contractors sort of work together to artificially inflate the costs of these big mandatory projects.
And the legal response since the fire has been swift.
Very. 14 people have been arrested so far. Contractors, subcontractors, consultants.
And they're facing charges for both corruption and manslaughter.
That's right. The ICCAS is handling the corruption side, and the police are pursuing manslaughter charges. They are directly linking that negligent use of materials to the loss of life.
And the warning signs were there? I mean, this wasn't a secret risk.
Not at all. Sources show that residents had already complained about the netting. They raised safety concerns. Okay. The complaints got nowhere. They reported it, and there was just a total breakdown in oversight. Nobody listened.
Which points to a much deeper problem.
It points to the core regulatory weakness. For years, the rules about the fire performance of facades and scaffolding materials were stuck in technical circulars, guidelines.
They weren't law.
They weren't mandatory, criminally enforceable legislation. And that regulatory gap, that weakness, is exactly what a dishonest contractor can exploit to cut corners and save a little bit of money.
It's just so predictable in its failure. So, okay, let's look at the path forward. What are the lessons here?
Well, the chief executive, John Lee, has announced a judge-led committee to investigate the whole thing. The focus is really on systemic failure.
And the scope of that inquiry, it's pretty wide, isn't it? It's not just about the fire.
Oh, it's a total system review. They've got 8 points to cover. Everything from construction safety standards to those issues of collusion and conflicts of interest.
And they're also looking at the regulators themselves.
Absolutely. The effectiveness of material testing, the accountability of government officials, and whether the current laws and penalties for fire responsibility are even tough enough.
So, stepping back, you said at the start that this mechanism, this killing formula, is familiar. Where else have we seen this?
It's tragically familiar. The rapid facade spread, the toxic smoke, the vulnerable residents. It's a direct echo of the 1996 Garley building fire in Hong Kong.
Right.
It's the 2010 Shanghai high-rise fire. And most famously, it is the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire in London. The mechanics are almost identical.
So there really is a repeatable blueprint for this kind of disaster.
There is, and engineers have identified it. You take an old high-rise building, you add a combustible facade or scaffolding system, you combine that with inadequate escape routes and smoke control, and you put it all inside a system with regulatory and management failures.
And the result is predictable.
The result is dozens of people dying from toxic smoke in a very, very short window of time. The fire isn't the problem, not really. It's the lethal environment that human decisions created.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. This was not an act of God. This was a preventable tragedy, driven by a clear technical problem, using cheap, flammable nets and foam that was made lethal by alleged corruption and a completely broken regulatory system.
Exactly. And the conclusion from the technical reports is stark. You can't rely on rescue. The firefighters, no matter how heroic, can't solve this problem after the fact. It demands a systematic re-engineering of building codes, of material standards, of the entire legal framework for these aging buildings.
And the technical report ends with a pretty severe warning, and this is what we want to leave you with. It says the risk of another Kwong level disaster remains extremely high if mandatory upgrades to facades, sprinklers, and smoke control systems aren't completed in the next 5 to 10 years. Which raises a really important question for you, the listener. Think about the scaffolding you see in your own city on those aging buildings. What unknown, predictable risks are hidden right now behind that green netting and those complex, potentially corruptible supply chains? Something to think about until our next deep dive.